Hey guys, welcome to the SimRacingPaddock. I'm William Marsh, and this is my review on the SimuCUBE Opensim wheel. I've now owned my OSW from SimRacingBay for a little over 6 months now, so I would like to share my impressions on what it is like to sim race with a high-end racing wheel and if it's worth the investment. First off, let's tackle the question, what exactly is a direct drive racing wheel? The simplest answer is, a direct drive wheel is a wheel that is directly driven by a motor instead of using a system such as a belt drive or gear drive system. Most consumer-grade racing wheels will utilize a smaller force feedback motor and then utilize a gear or belt system to amplify the forces. While this does a solid job replicating forces, there are drawbacks such as loss of clarity, detail, and potentially precision. What a direct drive wheel does is it takes a huge motor and makes it so you can put a steering wheel on it and use it as a wheel for racing video games. Generally, direct drive wheels are more powerful, more precise, and more detailed than mass-market consumer-grade wheels. Direct drive wheels have had a few drawbacks over the first few years, namely them being prohibitively expensive. For example, Leo Bodnar's SimSteering 2, one of the top-of-the-line direct drive wheels, has had a retail price starting at over $3,000 US, and that's not including a steering rim. Because of the nature of the wheel using an industrial-grade Cole-Morgan motor and using proprietary software and hardware at the beginning, it led to an insanely high price. Enter the Opensim wheel. The initial concept behind the OSW is that you could build your own direct drive wheel for a lower price than the more expensive offerings. You would be able to source your own servomotor, pair it with a modular-based electronic system, install open source software, and then you'd be good to go. Thanks to the Opensim wheel project, you could set up your own direct drive racing wheel for less than half the price of the before mentioned SimSteering, depending on what you use. One other interesting element of the Opensim wheel compared to consumer market wheels is the fact there are two separate units to the wheel. The part that attaches to the rig is the motor, and behind it is a single component, the encoder. The motor and encoder are attached to a separate box via two cables where all the electronic components are inside. That box is then connected to the computer. Also, there is the ability to plug different devices into the electrical box, but I have not tested that out personally. One of the initial downsides of the Opensim wheel movement was it required technical know-how to build an OSW, which could be rather daunting for some. Recently, we have seen a rise in companies manufacturing turnkey solutions, offering the wheel's motor, encoder, electrical box, and all the cabling you would need to get the wheel up and running. The only thing you would need to source yourself is a steering wheel rim. As mentioned, the wheel I'm using was produced by SimRacingBay, which is located out of Slovenia. The model I'm reviewing utilizes the MIDGE 130ST15015 model, which is nicknamed the Large Midge. The 130 series from MIDGE is one of the most commonly used for Opensim wheels due to the performance to price ratio. MIDGE's motors are most commonly used for applications such as CNC machines, conveyor belts, and so on. The Large Midge is capable of producing 15 Newton meters of constant torque, but the more relevant figure for sim racing is the peak torque, and that is a staggering 30 Newton meters of torque. To put it in perspective, this wheel is capable of producing forces 10 times more powerful than the Logitech G29. Also, the Large Midge is approximately 15% more powerful than the most powerful SimSteering wheel, which generates 26 Newton meters of torque. However, the price of the SimRacingBay Opensim wheel is significantly lower, retailing for 1,150 British pounds or around $1,462. There's also the small Midge offering, which utilizes the MIDGE 130ST M10010, which is another very popular option around the €999 mark or $1,162. Now, spending over $1,000 for a racing wheel and then spending a couple hundred more dollars for a rim can be a tall order. Fortunately, there are a few options. The wheel comes with an adapter to utilize a 6-bolt 70mm pattern on the unit. That makes it compatible with a variety of rims and quick release options. For my testing, I've been utilizing my Fanatic rims on the wheel with the SimRacing Machine's Fanatic Conversion Kit. If you're going from the Fanatic ecosystem to an OSW, you may want to consider getting the conversion kit to save a little bit of money on rims. Note that you would also need to purchase the Fanatic Quick Release half from SimRacingBay or source a QR from Fanatec CSL or Clubsport wheelbase. Also, if you decide to get an Opensim wheel, I highly recommend getting the shielded cable options. While it may sound like a ripoff at 70 extra euros, these cables do a great job at preventing electromagnetic interference, or EMI. EMI can be a problem with direct drive wheels due to the nature of the wheel having a giant magnet inside it. I have heard many stories of friends not getting the shielded cables, and then EMI would cause erratic behavior in their other components. So I know it's expensive, but the shielded cables really are worth it. Also, one major factor that needs to be touched on is the fact that the SimuCUBE Opensim wheel is a PC-only wheel. With the included hardware, there's no support for any console. I have heard that people are getting an Opensim wheel to work using the gimmicks adapter, so that could be an option if you're willing to tinker around. One last thing I want to talk about before sharing my driving impressions is the fact that you will likely need a very beefy rig to mount the wheel on. These industrial servo motors used for Opensim wheels do not use conventional hole patterns that wheels such as Fanatic, Thrustmaster, or Logitech wheels use. Also, keep in mind that the midge motors used for the OSW are very heavy, with the small midge weighing in at around 25 pounds and the large midge weighing in at over 30 pounds. SimRacingBay includes a few different ways to mount the Opensim wheel. For my driving though, I have it mounted onto the Husingveld Engineering SimRig GT, utilizing the motor's front-facing holes. A mounting bracket is also included with the wheel, which can allow for you to mount to the bottom, but you will likely need a custom mounting solution. So, if you are looking to get one of these wheels, keep your mounting options in mind. If you want to try to use a more traditional mounting method, SimLab also offers a new adapter that can use Fanatic holes, so that could be an option, but keep in mind that is an additional cost. Now that we've gotten all this mumbo jumbo out of the way, let's talk about how it actually feels to drive with the Opensim wheel. To put it simply, this has been a redefinition of the way I enjoy sim racing. Driving with a direct drive wheel is truly an eye-opening experience, and it will likely spoil you for other wheels. In the past, I've been outspoken about how the Fanatic Clubsport wheel version 2.5 is my favorite non-direct drive racing wheel. However, the Opensim wheel absolutely blows the Clubsport wheel V2.5 out of the water in nearly every category. The Opensim wheel is smoother, quicker, stronger, more precise, and more immersive than any gear or belt-driven wheel in the market. When the OSW is dialed in, it is truly a euphoric experience, and I think the term sim racing bliss could be rather fitting. With the Opensim wheel, you get to feel extremely subtle nuances you just can't experience with any wheel from Logitech, Thrustmaster, or even Fanatic's current offerings. One term you'll hear a lot when talking about wheels and force feedback is clipping. In layman's terms, clipping is when a racing title is trying to send more force feedback than what a racing wheel can handle. Because the wheel would not be able to handle the full forces, part of that force feedback is clipped, and you will lose out on clarity. This is particularly an issue with lower end wheels due to the fact that they are producing lower torque figures and are not capable of producing forces similar to what race cars can generate. For example, imagine you are using a Logitech wheel and the force feedback is cranked up to 100 and you are going through a high-speed corner. If you hit the curbs on exit, the forces being sent by the sim will be too high for the wheel to handle and you will be clipping. Because of that, you will not feel the curbs through the force feedback because those higher frequency forces are being clipped away and the force feedback will feel very heavy but dead. One of the great things about direct drive wheels is the fact that you will likely never clip during average driving circumstances. Generally, I drive with my large midge Opensim wheel at around 30% strength. That may not sound like much at first glance, but when I say that at 30%, the Opensim wheel is around 50% stronger than the Fanatic CSW V2.5, that starts to put things into perspective. So, going through corners at high speeds, you will still feel that immense low-end force that is coming from the car's suspension loading up, but you will still have an overhead to feel the subtle nuances like going over a curb or hitting a bump, or even driving over a seam in the pavement. It's an interesting situation to experience when transferring from a lower end wheel to a direct drive wheel, but it's also an experience that I think has spoiled me. Now, I think one question you guys will have is, so you're not using 70% of your potential forces? Why the heck are you spending over $1,000 on a wheel you're not using even half the power of? Well, the answer to that is simple. The wheel isn't just a torque machine. There are other nuances and elements that need to be considered when making this investment. As I mentioned before, the wheel is incredibly precise, quick, and very smooth. This wheel outclasses just about every wheel with a gear or belt drive construction, and also factor in that there is the ability to still turn up the force feedback higher. For example, if I wanted to run with an IndyCar, which doesn't have power steering, I could turn up the forces to try to closer simulate that car, which can legitimately have spikes in the steering forces around the 30 Nm range. That is something you just simply can't get with the mass market consumer grade wheel. However, I would have to be legitimately careful not to hurt myself though, because you could injure your hand or maybe even your shoulder if you're running at higher strength levels with a direct drive wheel. However, it is nice to know that at least this wheel is capable of producing the one-to-one steering forces that some real-life cars can produce. Now, I do want to mention this wheel is not perfect though. One thing that is a blessing and a curse is that the Opensim wheel uses open source hardware and software developed by Granite Devices. While the software is still very powerful, it is still in beta. Because of that, there are still some hiccups in compatibility with titles. For example, titles such as R Factor 2, Race Room Racing Experience, and F1 2018 have problems with automatically setting degrees of rotation in game. So, to adjust the degrees of rotation for cars in the sim, you'll have to go into the SimuCUBE profiler, adjust the degrees of rotation, and then save the profile. Fortunately, you can have up to 100 preset profiles to configure to fit your personal preferences for cars and sims. And configuring is a big word when it comes to SimuCUBE. There are so many different settings when it comes to setting up the wheel, you can easily lose hours into setting up your ideal profile for different cars and different sims. At first, figuring out decent baselines can be rather daunting. Also, add in the factor that if you misconfigure your wheel, you could potentially hurt yourself, so be careful making adjustments. In the description, I will provide links to baseline settings I use for different sims, as well as notes that you should take into consideration while setting up your wheel. Another thing worth mentioning is that the OSW will likely eat up USB ports for breakfast. The OSW's control box features 2 mini USB ports that you can use for sending inputs to the wheel as well as performing firmware updates. While you can just utilize one USB cable to run the wheel and then just plug in the second cable as needed, it is admittedly more convenient to have just 2 ports used. Add in a third USB port for a steering wheel's button box, and that means you could be using 3 USB ports for an Opensim wheel. One thought that I've had with the Opensim wheel is the fact that this could be the last wheel you would ever need to buy. One of the great parts of this being an open source wheel is that just about every part is user replaceable. Have the SimuCUBE mainboard fail on you? You could just buy a replacement from Granite Devices and swap it out. New parts also will come out periodically, bringing new features to the OSW. For example, we have seen recent improvements in the encoders. The encoder is used to detect the rotation in the wheel and sends the data to the electronics to be sent to the computer. In the past, the OSW would use basic encoders included with the midge motor, but we have now had the SimuCUBE encoder being released and then phased out in favor of the newer, higher resolution BIS-C encoder, which is now sold with the OSW. Earlier Opensim wheels felt like a step below the more expensive offerings such as the SimSteering 2 wheel, but now, with the SimuCUBE encoder I've been using for 6 months, I feel like the Opensim wheel has passed up its more expensive rival. I am planning on doing another video in the future testing out the newer BIS-C encoder to see how it improves on my SimuCUBE. The other question I'll likely get is, has the Opensim wheel made me a better driver? That is a little more of a complicated situation. I think one way to put it though is that it has reinforced solid driving habits and it has downright punished stupidity. To get the most out of the Opensim wheel, you will at least have to have a solid fundamental understanding on how to drive, even more so than when you drive with lower tier hardware. This wheel can legitimately hurt you if you drive wrong with it, but it will reward you if you treat it right. I can't say the wheel has made me magically an outright faster driver, but it has given me the ability to be more consistent and also more confident in my driving ability. The Opensim wheel is easily my favorite sim racing wheel that I've ever driven with. The wheel provides the most raw and immersive experience you can get. With this wheel, you get even closer to a one-to-one driving experience, and that is the overall goal for immersive sim racing. The Opensim wheel is far from plug and play, but if you put the effort and time into fine-tuning the wheel, it is one of the best experiences you will ever get in sim racing. Let's get on to the pros and cons, and as always, let's start with the pros. One of the smoothest sim racing wheels available on the market. Incredibly quick, allows you to catch slides and improve driving. Powerful enough to replicate one-to-one steering forces for most race cars. Subtle enough to feel effects you would not feel with other wheels. Incredibly diverse setting customization options. Open source hardware and software allows for great user replaceability. Variety of mounting options. Option to connect other controllers into the control box. Comes with a 2-year warranty. And now let's get on to the cons. Very expensive. Needs a sturdy rig to mount onto. You need to supply your own steering wheel rim. Customization options and setting adjustments can be overwhelming. Utilizes multiple USB ports, especially if you are using a rim with buttons. Only compatible on PC unless you buy third-party hardware. SimuCUBE software can be buggy at times. Potential for EMI interfering with controls. So let's get to the bottom line. Do I recommend the Opensim wheel? If you have the money and a strong enough rig, then I would definitely say yes. This is one of the most desired sim racing wheels on the market, and for good reason. It is powerful enough to replicate real-life steering forces even in some of the most brutal race cars. At the same time though, it is subtle enough to feel the gentle bumps and even distinguish driving over a seam in the pavement. Add in near bulletproof hardware reliability and the ability to customize to your heart's content, and we have a winner here. This wheel isn't perfect though, and there are some minor gripes I have with this. For a $1,000 investment, these are things that will really need to be taken into consideration. Are you willing to spend hours tinkering with your wheel settings to get things dialed in just right? Are you alright diving down the rabbit's hole of open source software? If you answered yes, then the Opensim wheel is a great option. If you prefer something a little more refined and maybe a little less open source, then the SimXperience AccuForce and the upcoming Fanatic Podium Series wheels could be decent options as well. However, I freaking love my Opensim wheel, and I can wholeheartedly endorse it for those looking to step up their sim racing experience to the next level. I hope you enjoyed my review on the SimuCUBE based Opensim wheel from SimRacingBay. Now, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you have or want an Opensim wheel? What are your experiences? Let us know in the comments. Also, if you like this review, please consider hitting that like button and subscribing so you can help keep us on track. For the SimRacingPaddock, I'm William Marsh, and you have a good one.